Welcome to Biztech's Leadership Conversation Show. Today we speak with Geraldine Kor, the Managing Director, South Asia and Country Managing Director, Singapore at Telstra. Now, welcome to the show, Geraldine.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Now, Geraldine, could you give us an insight into what Telstra does in the region? Because most of the time, people know Telstra as a telco in Australia.
That's correct. So Telstra, it is the largest telco in Australia, but we do have an international business that is fairly big. In fact, we've been doing the international business for about 70 plus years. So the South Asia region is actually part of the international team. And what we do is we run a third of Asia Pacific subsea cables. So aside from connectivity, in terms of providing connectivity to companies across Asia and to the world, we also provide and have a whole host of enterprise products and solutions that supports our clients in the region.
Okay, could you give us some insights into some of your key products and service offerings?
So one of the things that we do from a very traditional way is we provide a lot of the dedicated network across to our large financial institutions, manufacturing companies, where they require specific large bandwidth across specific to their branches and their banks, as an example. So for instance, we run a lot of the networks for a lot of the banks, US banks, European banks, Asia banks, where they need a low latency effect. So to make sure that, they do not get any disruption. So that's part of the core of the business. We also provide a lot of security cloud services to our enterprise customers, particularly as we're all talking about digital transformation. A lot of the enterprise services that the clients require, SD-WAN, adaptive network, unified collaboration with regards to communications, we provide a whole host of services like that.
So Geraldine, I'm going to come back to you on the digital transformation bit, because you just hit the nail on the head in terms of some of the questions I want to ask you. But before that, you joined Telstra this year in January, after working in DXC Technologies for quite a while. Tell us about how your experience has been in this leadership role compared to your previous organizations.
Yeah, so I think when the opportunity came for me to join Telstra, one of the things was the focus on people, right? So when you have a conversation, you speak to your potential line manager, speak to your boss, and I asked a lot about the culture and what they're trying to build. I think there were a couple of things that stood out. One, as being part of Telstra International, we had the level of independence for us to be able to really innovate and grow. Second, that I found it interesting was the ability to transform a traditional business into a business that is new. So as we all know, telcos in the 80s and 90s, were king of the road, right? They were able to drive huge revenues, mobile consumption. So it was right at the peak. And then you kind of look down the road where a lot of the core voice business has gone away. People are consuming much more on the internet and data. Telcos themselves have to transform a lot. Obviously, with technology and 5G, there are a lot of opportunities up front. But one of the things that really attracted me to the role was the ability to transform the business, but primarily for our focus to pivot to enterprise, which is to transform our customers' business. And that, I felt that it was something that I could do in a smaller setup, because that means we can actually move faster.
Okay, so interestingly enough, 2021, what have been your key priorities in this space?
So I think there were a couple of areas that was key. So when I first joined, Telstra has gone through their own digital transformation. So over the last 5 years, they've proactively done a transformation, as widely reported in Australian news, where they've moved and tried to rework the organization into being more agile. And that also means, cutting parts of the business that was not so efficient. So we proactively went on that journey. So joining in 2021, we were already about 90% into that journey. I was towards the tail end in terms of, from a corporate perspective, the changes that we took. Then for me, is what did it mean for the folks in the South Asia region, which represents Southeast Asia, India, Australia, New Zealand out, was people have been working from home for the last 12, 18 months.
Yes.
How do you sort of wake people up, right? To say that, hey, you know, that work from home is now a new normal, but this hybrid work is different. How do I sort of rally the troops back and focus on the renewed energies? So that I found was challenging initially, was when we said, okay, we are supporting this flex and work from home policy, but we like to get people sort of across sort of where the new vision is. And, you know, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the studies that we did with digital transformation. I think there was nothing unique about Telstra. We were like many of the companies that were trying to adjust ourselves. So coming in as a new leader was really trying to get to know the people, have as many conversations as possible, understand the business, and then put forth a strategy that would place us well to the years forward.
Geraldine, I think one of the key challenges being a newcomer is actually this, and you mentioned that it's about getting the people together, because I think most large companies have come to realize that while work from home, especially technology, initially everyone was, this is the new norm and this is going to be the way forward. People have realized that creativity is one thing that we lose. The second thing is also the camaraderie and the bonds that knit people together from informal conversation is what really shapes organizations, and that's what we've been missing.
Absolutely, absolutely. So actually, interesting that you said that, Brian, because what we have done actually when I came on board was to build up an experience center. So while many companies are looking into downsizing their offices, what we have done is we have recreated our space in the office to make sure that we created co-sharing space. And what we did was we actually started to build an innovation co-creation space, and we've converted that. That's almost pretty much ready to launch, where we have got a wide area for fireside chats for people to do lunch and learn, brown box sessions. We've got a couple of big screens to allow for ideation and workshops. So there was something that, you know, we've put it there. I think it's important for us, you know, to have that artifacts, but we've reimagined work, right? I know there's a lot of companies to say that I want to get rid of the expensive real estate because I don't need that anymore, right? You guys are working efficiently at home. I can save all this cost. I think that's not all that true. There is a way that there is, that, as you said, the collaboration, that social interaction. Having a Zoom call and having a brainstorming session is very much different when you're face to face, where you have all of that, and then you go out for a dinner and drinks, and that's where the real creative juices come. So what I've done is really made sure that, you know, we get our teams back. And, you know, since the reopening, we've actually seen a lot of our colleagues back in the office, and to hear the buzz, you know, it's just music to my ears.
Fantastic. And also one of the things that you've done as an organization, you've just set up, announced the setting up of an innovation center in India, right? Tell us about that.
So the India Center is something that we have started probably about 2 years back. This is part of the idea, obviously, as we know, India in Bangalore, and it's not only Bangalore, right? People have the perception that Bangalore is the only hot hub, but we've started to look at it in Pune and Hyderabad as well, is that there's a lot of talent there. And in fact, the war for talent is the brightest and the best that are there. So the intent with the Innovation Center is for us to be able to co-innovate with customers, to also to be able to use Telstra as the #1 customer, right? So nothing beats eating your own dog food. So being able to really build your own projects internally, and then be able to bring and expand it to our customers.
I want to ask you about leadership, because you've evolved now into, this is a main leadership role for you, but you've come from the tech business, and you've also had an entrepreneurial venture before. How have the roles within the tech industry and your own achievements shaped your leadership style?
That's a great question, Brian. And I think there's many levels to look at it. If I kind of think where I've spent about 20+ years in tech, you know, I started my career being in a large industrial German firm called Bosch. That was my first introduction. It was pretty low tech, 20 years ago. And then I moved to Nokia, which was obviously very high tech in terms of mobile. And then I spent about 10 plus years in a location mapping company, and then got to DXC and then Telstra. So I would say it's a different set of roles. But one thing that I say as a common thread was I always went after the smaller divisions, the newer divisions, where you had to almost prove yourself. And I think that has really given me a whole lot of experience because nothing came easy. So it was always trying to build an ecosystem of partners and suppliers with your customers. And ultimately, although we say we're in a tech business, it's about people and trust. And how do you build that people and trust is through that one-on-one relationships, because the technology will somehow take care for itself. But that people and trust, stood me in good stead. So I would say where I am today, I really have to thank and appreciate all of my customers, my suppliers, but just learning multiculturally across all the large tech giants. So, learning from the Finnish, learning from the Germans, learning from the Chinese, learning from the Koreans. Every different culture, if you think about how some of these countries became such large tech superhouses, that sort of culminated together and kind of framed my thinking as I sort of, went towards my own journey as well.
And also, one of the things that I think really would have shaped your journey is you started a business in artisanal cheese and fine foods in 2012. Tell us about this business and what inspired you to start it.
So I could get into trouble for saying it, but since I've already left the previous company, I would. So the idea actually started in a mountain in Champagne in Switzerland. Okay. I was invited, or in fact, I was selected at the time I was working for Nokia, and they had an executive leadership program where they invited a whole bunch of so-called high potentials from all over the world and stuck us in to a little ski town in Switzerland with a couple of IMD scholars and said, hey, you guys should just socialize, get trained on leadership and management. And at the time I had an Austrian-Hungarian coach who was having conversations with me, and he said, Jerry, what do you want to do? And I said, I've always wanted to do my own business. Okay, if you want to do your own business, you need to write down on a piece of paper your ideas and think about the people that you know. So when I got back to Singapore, I told my future business partner, and we sat down in Starbucks with a piece of paper, and literally, I kid you not, what are some of the ideas? And cheese came about because we felt like cheese was so expensive in Asia. And we said, okay, I think cheese is going to be like wine 20 years ahead. Let's go register a company. And that was how it started.
So were you inspired by the raclette when you were in Switzerland?
But actually, Brian, you are right. I ate a lot of cheese when I was in Switzerland. But that was how it started, with an idea. And then I just met a lot of good people. We had the good fortune to meet with a lot of people who were willing to give us a chance. And then the business just took off.
And what lessons did you learn from running that business for 6 years?
So there were many things that I learned. It was like almost a mini MBA. But I think if there was one thing that I learned was being open. For those of us who have been in the corporate world, we're so used to our spreadsheets, to our PowerPoints, our business cases, and say that, before you buy into an idea, you need to ensure that you've got all of the data done. When you're in the F&B industry and you work with chefs all they do are passion projects, right? They say, let's go do this because we think that it starts off with a good idea, and you just pursue it. I think that has so much learning for me because, sometimes in the corporate world, we get so restricted by all of, the financials, and you kill the idea even before you allow the idea to live. And I think where I learned a lot from the chefs is it really starts with the idea. And if you think about startups these days, it always starts with the right idea. How do you solve a problem? So there was one learning. I think the other learning that I did was being able to be agile, to think, how do you compete with the bigger guys? So when we started, our business, we were small, we were very much focused only on cheese. I was up against large food giants who were, had a whole spectrum of products ranging from meat, seafood, and so on and so forth. And then when I speak to my hotel customers, they say you need to get your price down 30% because you're not competitive. How do you grapple with that, right? So we thought of ideas in terms of how do we ensure that we continue to maintain our key customers. So we threw in training F&B staff, training the staff, provided value-added services. And I think that stands the test of time. Essentially, it's a business model of, how do you make sure that you work through that in order to be able to support your business, but also be able to support your customers that are requesting for it.
And also then when you're in the quality game, it's about taking the conversation away from price.
That's correct.
How did this then change your overall leadership style when you got back to the corporate world again?
It's a great question. So I think ultimately, when we talk to customers, there's two things, right? And that sort of, brings back to what I tell my people and tell my team at Telstra is that we exist to solve our customers' problems. And it's as simple as that, right? It's because sometimes you get so caught up in pushing out your products and services, you forget that you're trying to solve your customers' problems. And in the end, if I think about, like, we run some of the largest networks in Asia. If a bank goes out of service because my network has an outage, that directly impacts my customer, right? So how do I ensure that I've got the right quality control, I've got the right processes, that if that goes down, we're able to recover? If I think about some of the digital transformation projects that we do, how do we solve some of the pain that they're suffering right now, right? With regards to remote working, with the pandemic. So for me, I think it's, when we think and have that goal in mind, which is to solve customers' problems, I think everything sort of takes care of itself.
Now, as a woman leader in technology, Geraldine, what advice would you give people or companies in order to create a much more inclusive workforce? Because a lot of times you find across the region that there is a glass ceiling for women. What are your thoughts and what have been your insights and experiences as a woman in tech?
Well, I know, Brian, you're really passionate about this topic, and I do have, a lot of thoughts around it, because being a woman leader myself, a lot of the times when I speak to my teams, they say that, you really encourage me, how do I be more like you, right? So I think if you look at it from a woman's perspective, it's, as you said, there are often, particularly in tech, there's a lot of glass ceiling where women might feel, uncomfortable, right? In terms of standing up for themselves, being a bit more vocal. And what I do is I encourage them, right? And I did a whole bunch of mentorships in my past for women leaders as well. And that is something that is common across. So it's not only in Asia, you have that even in, the Anglo countries as well. So I say that you have to bring what's deep inside you, because women brings a different diversity in terms of their thinking, in terms of, how they frame their thinking, right? So you must be able to bring forth that authenticity in you, because over time, your peers and your colleagues will be able to respect that and see you for who you are. Obviously, sometimes you might have to work harder than the rest, but I think ultimately, if you're able to prove your value and you're able to be confident doing so, I think half that battle is already done.
Geraldine, there has been a push globally, especially in the tech industry now, to have more women in boardrooms, because that's really something that I think organizations are realizing, that diversity of thought is important, of course, but also the fact that women bring some extra elements to the table in a boardroom that perhaps enhance overall boardroom effectiveness and performance. What are your thoughts on this area?
I think it's really important, right? So, I'm part of the marketing committee of the Singapore Institute of Directors. So I've interacted with a lot of, board members as well as a lot of members. And I think there's a couple of things. One, the awareness is still fairly low, so there is definitely an intent. There are certain countries that mandate X percentage of women on boards, right? Because they just want to force the diversity. But as with anything, you might be able to have the diversity, but are you having that inclusion as part of that board? And that is absolutely key. Is obviously the first thing is to ensure that we've got the diversity to have women on boards, because they bring a fresh set of thinking. They've got a different point of view. They bring the softer side of things, right? So that you kind of say that, okay, let's think about the people, because there's consequences to that. But the other board members needs to include that diversity. And I think we're still some ways away, obviously, right? Because there's certain boards that are very, male dominated. And so it's not easy even if you have one voice. But I think many of the women board members are already starting their ground, and that gives them confidence and strength to encourage other board members to come on board. One of the things that we've also heard is that women themselves are reluctant to come on board. So that itself is a problem.
And why is that?
Well, I think, as you said, women have to balance many roles, right? So being a mother, being a wife, being working, there's a lot of responsibilities that women have to manage out of their work. So coming on board, they say, do I want to sign up for something that I'm going to be up against maybe 10 men who's going to tell me no in my face anyways? Do I want to do that? So you need to take for a couple of brave women to come and say that, no, in fact, I would like to do it, because I truly think that I'll bring a diverse set of experience that would help the company. And I think that's powerful.
Now, I want to zoom in then on a study that Telstra has just done earlier this year in terms of digital transformation. So this is a study of 420 decision makers spread across 7 countries in APAC, with a very interesting title, which is Balancing Digitization Ambitions with Cost Objectives. Now, why I found that interesting is because it has to be ambition coupled with reality. A lot of people have big ideas, organizations have big ideas, but they've got a limited budget. So tell us a little bit about the study itself and some of its key findings.
Yeah, it was such an interesting study for us, Brian, because, when we did the study, we did that in December 2020, sort of, right in the midst of the pandemic. And we wanted to really explore the research, right? Because everyone has sort of gone through digital transformation. It's such a buzzword. It's been a buzzword over the last 4 or 5 years. And we've seen companies sort of progress. So the larger companies have got big budgets. If you think about 4 or 5 years ago, a lot of companies started with digital labs, digital divisions, everything digital, a CDO and all of that, right? So that budget of transformation was massive. Then they realized that, it wasn't so effective, because many parts of the business say that, okay, we're good with that innovation, but are you contributing to the bottom line? So we said, okay, let's really understand and unpack the research to understand from the key decision makers how important is digital transformation for them, given that a lot of businesses were impacted during the pandemic, and how are they reallocating their resources to be able to support some of the initiatives. And what we have found is that majority, 90+% of companies have actually gone through some kind of digital transformation, big or small. However, their cost management initiatives has become top of mind. Where it used to be secondary because they need to work through the budgets, it has become top of mind because already their revenues are shrinking, but at the same time, the need to transform is even more urgent. So that has, unraveled a lot of sort of new findings for us in terms of how they go to market, certain sectorial changes that are impacting different industries compared to others.
So could you give us perhaps some of the standout changes that have happened in certain sectors?
Yeah, so I think, one of the things that some of the sectors, like the more traditional retail type of companies, some of the smaller companies, was that they realizes that the lack of having IT has actually impacted directly their business continuity. So it's almost a do or die, right? If I were not to transform, essentially I will not be able to continue my business. I think if I take an example that is, you know, your mom and pop store, right? Where they say that when you lock down, restaurants are all closed. The F&B industry was impacted the most. If you do not have a website, if you're not connecting with the delivery platforms, essentially all of your revenue streams have gone. So just at the most basic level, if you look at some of the smaller enterprises, this is where they say, okay, I need to ensure that I've got some kind of a digital front because I can continue selling. If you look at some of the mid-size and larger size customers that we have, for instance, where you talk about banks, where they were, you know, banks have really been ahead of the curve. So they have been driving a lot of that transformation. But some of our customers or some of the banks come to us and say that, oh, my traders who used to be working in the office now can no longer go into the office. They need to do their trade at home. How do you ensure the security and the surveillance to make sure that they're making the right trades? So all of a sudden, you know, cyber is top of mind. We know that that's top of mind, but the scenario has changed and companies are being forced to figure out, you know, how do I transform to fit that scenario?
Now, in that case, and let's zoom in on your big clients, obviously financial services guys, right? The digital transformation seems to have been working for them because the financial services industry is doing very, very well. In fact, in a Singapore context and in some of the regional markets, banks are in a hiring binge. So this transformation has actually worked for them. Where have they seen the biggest improvements and payback from their digital transformation initiatives?
So look, I think, as you said, that's a great question. I think just starting the journey early, if you think about, they started at least 10 years before, and they've gone through so many different models, right? Some of them have gone through an insourcing model, some of them have done an outsourcing model, sometimes it's a hybrid model. But the fact that they were on the journey early enabled them to learn very quickly. So I would say the banks, in terms of infrastructure, they have already moved, right? They've decided whether I do a hybrid cloud, do I do a multi-cloud? They've figured out the infrastructure strategy. Where I think they're really now going after is the applications to the business. So how do I make sure that we've got the right applications to support the business? How do I make sure that I'm using a lot of the data that we're getting, right, to be able to ensure that we can use that data and be able to serve their needs better? We have seen analytics as an area that, you know, they're really driving towards. So there's a whole bunch of analytics data that they have acquired. We have seen insurance companies, for instance, where contact centers used to be just, you know, having a call. Now they're looking at, you know, multiple points of contact through WhatsApp, through chat bots, through the internet, through Instagram. How do you sort of bring that together? In fact, that is a massive growth area that we've seen working through with our customers as well as our partners, that this multi-collaboration onto the cloud, how do you make it more efficient? How do you ensure that you're constantly in touch with our customers grow tremendously?
Geraldine, the banks have obviously been ahead of the curve. But where do you see key trends shaping the industry moving forward, especially in the next 24 months, when digital transformation will become less of 12 to 20, 24 to 40, 48 months, where digital transformation will be less of a buzzword, but more business as usual and business normal?
Correct. So I think there is a market that is not well served, that really requires, and I think the pandemic has really shown that, which is the small, medium enterprises. And that's an area where I think tech companies, government tries to support, because this is the long tail that supports our broader economy, right? So we're talking about at least 180 to 200 million customers of small, medium enterprises across the Asia Pacific region, which requires digital, and they're just at the cusp of it. So I think that is for us, I think as a tech company, as a services company, is how do we better serve this untapped segment? It's almost saying like, how do you tap to the unbanked, right? Yes. This is a segment where it's underserved. and they all need help in terms of getting them onto the cloud, working and ensuring that their business is more secure, and ensuring that their employees are also able to balance, right, this remote working as well.
And so what can we expect, Geraldine, from Telstra in 2022 in this regard?
So, I tell my team that, this is one of the best years to be at, because we're seeing a massive uptake in digital transformation projects. We're seeing a massive uptake in terms of customers coming to us, trying to transform their business. So for us, we're focused on a couple of things. One is to ensure that we continue to support our clients on that journey, wherever they are on that journey. Co-creation and innovation, because nothing beats just creating. So really understanding their challenges and creating, new solutions together. And we're very big on the future of modern workplace. So that's an area that I think presents a lot of opportunities, but it's also an area that industry partners alike are still trying to form a right approach. And I think that's exciting, because you can really unearth a lot of new innovation as we all start to experiment and figure out what is the best model for companies and employees alike.
Geraldine, it's been a fascinating conversation, but before we end, any final thoughts from you?
No, I think, Brian, if there's one thing that I would really push, is for us to be able to continue to challenge ourselves, have the courage to innovate, and really bring everybody else on that journey. The ecosystem is big. Let us keep our eyes and minds open, because partnerships and innovation is the way to go.
Geraldine, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Lovely talking to you.
Now, I'm Brian Fernandez, and I've been speaking to Geraldine Kor, Managing Director, South Asia, and Country Managing Director, Singapore at Telstra, on Biztech's Leadership Conversation show. Check out www.biztech.asia for business and technology conversations. This video will be on our Facebook and LinkedIn sites, as well as our website. Please subscribe and like our various platforms. Thank you very much for tuning in.